Welcome to Alien Dusk, where sci-fi becomes real. Like, subscribe. The journey begins. Ash drifted like snow across Vareth 7, soft enough to forget it was bone and memory. Commander Elias Rourke walked through it as if untouched, though the war clung to him in every scar. A decade past the ceasefire, and still the ghost of Earth's finest killer cast a long, uneasy shadow. No medals, no flags. Just the weight of decisions carved into muscle and bone. He served now as a peacekeeper, a polite fiction. What he really did was prevent the next war from starting where the last one ended. Not with weapons, but with presence. A stare that reminded people he'd survived things worse than their threats. He carried no weapon. Hadn't since Glasslight. The city's name was etched in whispers across 1,000 military reports. The place where Elias disobeyed a direct orbital strike, sparing millions but costing his command. He never spoke of it. He didn't have to. Some said it was guilt that kept him on Vareth. Others said duty. The truth was quieter, like the man himself. He couldn't leave a battlefield half-finished. But even Elias, hardened by 10 lifetimes of regret, didn't know the war had already come looking for him again. And this time, it would beg for mercy. Vareth 7 was beauty-bound in scar tissue. A planet where glass plains shimmered beside collapsed arcologies and spires of alien crystal, rose from human concrete like bones through skin. It was the treaty world, the armistice anchor. Here, Earth's diplomats rubbed shoulders with Ishari nobles and mercenary cartels, all playing civility atop a graveyard. Every corridor buzzed with 10 languages, none trusted. Every meal might be a negotiation or a setup. The air stank of ozone, engine oil, and old blood. Human settlements fused with Ishari ruins, plasma conduits threading through decaying temples. Traders sold black market biotech beside diplomats shaking hands for peace they didn't believe in. Above it all, orbital defense grids blinked, outdated, underpowered, but still dangerous. One misstep, and the whole powder keg would go. It was meant to be neutral ground. Instead, it was a waiting room for the next war. And Elias Rourke walked straight down its center. The Ishari once ruled by blood and gene sequence, a crystalline empire of engineered elegance. Their noble houses bred purpose into lineage, soldiers with reflexes like lightning, diplomats who could bend emotion with scent, rulers grown in thrones of living stone. Now those thrones lay fractured. Rebellion gutted the dominion from within. Castes turned on castes, royal blood-soaked palace floors, and old truce splintered into exile and desperation. Refugees clung to shattered protocol, wearing honor like armor in a galaxy that no longer bowed. To humans, it made no sense. Elias had seen it firsthand, how an Ishari would die before breaking rank, or kill before bending tradition. He remembered the eyes of a child soldier begging for orders as fire fell around her. Ishari believed in duty as destiny. Humans believed in choice. That difference had cost millions. And for Elias, it would cost more before this war truly ended. Elias Rourke walked the halls of neutrality, with his hand never far from a sidearm he swore he wouldn't draw. Each day on Vareth 7 was a bargain struck in blood and shadow. He brokered ceasefires between pirate lords and Ishari aristocrats who once hunted humans for sport. He dined with war criminals to keep children from starving. He shook hands with murderers because the alternative was cities burning. To the galaxy, he was a peacekeeper. To those who knew better, he was a man balancing on a knife's edge. His allies were few and strange. Lyra Voss, a human envoy who drank hope like poison and trusted no one. Sir Kayeth, in Ishari exile with a flawless memory and an agenda he kept hidden. And somewhere, always watching, the rogue AI Greywin, recording, learning, and perhaps judging. Whispers stirred like wind before a storm. Trade routes shifted, weapons caches vanished. Symbols of old Ishari rebellion began appearing on walls thought cleansed. Peace was fraying, lines were being drawn, and Elias knew better than most. The first shot in a new war never came with fanfare. It came quietly, from a place no one was looking, until the screaming started. The palace rose from the wasteland like a wounded god, its spires of crystal bone cracked by orbital fire. Biotech vines once humming with regal bioluminescence now pulsed weakly, like arteries cut too deep. What had once been the seat of Ishari pride now reeked of ash and ghost code. Elias moved through shattered halls beneath curling smoke, flanked by nervous scouts. Every step echoed through history. He had come to broker surrender, but the silence bit too sharply. No banners raised, no honor guard, only scorched murals and the smell of scorched flesh. Whispers told of a trap, of a faction refusing to kneel, of terms twisted until they bled dishonor. This wasn't diplomacy, it was a burial. And somewhere in those ruins, beneath crumbling stained glass suns, waited something unexpected, something that would unravel the stalemate, ignite new fires, and bind one man's fate to a dying empire's last heir. She emerged from the shattered throne room draped in torn ceremonial silk, her bearing regal even beneath soot and blood. Princess Tanael of the Ashari, once heir to a fading empire, bowed only slightly, not in submission, but in ritual. Behind her, a wide-eyed child clutched a broken pendant shaped like Earth's crescent moon. Tanael knelt on alien protocol woven from centuries of caste and sacrifice. She invoked the ancient rite, a concubine hostage vow offered to Elias in a language thick with war loss and royal desperation. A sacred bond, older than their wars, binding protection to honor, flesh to duty. Elias staggered, not from threat, but from the collision of worlds. He saw a woman stripped of empire yet refusing to beg, offering not surrender, but allegiance through a lens no human law could interpret. He had seconds to decide. Say yes, and he risked everything. Say no, and let them die. Dust swirled around the palace gates, carrying the ghosts of plasma fire and rotted honor. Elias dismounted from the armored crawler, boots sinking into soil baked glassy by orbital bombardments. The comms were silent, unnervingly so. No encryption codes, no Ishari formalities, just static and the high whine of residual energy fields. His escort scanned the ruins with practiced unease, fingers hovering near triggers. Something was off. No standard ceasefire staging. No generals. No white flags woven with family sigils. Just one broken courtyard framed by dying towers, and at its heart, a lone figure kneeling. She did not flinch beneath the crosshairs. Draped in ceremonial white faded to bone gray, she held the posture of old royalty. At her side stood a girl no older than 6, clutching a faded satchel and staring at Elias as if she already knew his name. There was no entourage, no guards, only her, and silence thick enough to shatter. Elias approached slowly, every sense burning. This wasn't surrender. It was something older. Older than treaties. Older than war. As the wind parted the haze, the princess stood and spoke a single word in Ishari high speech. A word meant to bind, not break. And Elias knew nothing would be simple again. Princess Tanael stood alone amidst the ruins of her world, regal despite the battle-worn ceremonial garb clinging to her slender frame. The once vibrant silks of her house were now gray and frayed, stained by ash and the smudge of war. Her posture was perfect, head held high, eyes clear and unwavering, as though she still stood before a court of honor, rather than the charred remnants of an empire she could not save. She was proud, yet the weariness clung to her like a second skin, born of years spent fleeing the wrath of her own people, exiled by blood and betrayal. The former heir of the Ashari dominion had become a relic, an isolated ghost of royalty, standing amid broken marble and forgotten splendor. Beside her, the child was silent, a Ceres, her daughter, her future, and a symbol of a fractured union. The girl's features were a delicate blend of human and Ishari, eyes too wide, skin too light, hair a tangled mix of dark and silver. She stared up at Elias without fear, her gaze an eerie mirror of both worlds in conflict. A princess without a court, a child without a future. The ruins of a kingdom were not her only loss. Tanael stepped forward, her movements deliberate, dignified. The air felt heavier, as if the ruins themselves held their breath. She did not bow. No, this was not an act of submission, but a statement of irrevocable purpose. She raised her hands, palms open to Elias, and spoke in the ancient tongue of the Ashari. "I offer myself to you, Commander Elias Rourke," she intoned, her voice calm, unyielding. "In the sacred bond of the concubine hostage, I pledge my loyalty, my protection, and my life, for I have no other means to survive. My daughter's life is as much yours to guard as my own." Elias froze, caught in a tide of incomprehension. To a human, the word concubine was laced with unspeakable implications. Subjugation, powerlessness, the deepest betrayal of a person's dignity. His heart raced, repulsed by the thought of taking her under such terms. But Tanel's eyes held no shame, no fear. In her gaze, Elias saw the weight of 1,000 lifetimes of tradition, a ritual far older than their human laws. The concubine hostage bond was not sexual slavery. It was a pledge of survival, a pact forged in blood and honor. Loyalty bound not through affection, but necessity. Protection, not possession. To Elias, it felt like a dagger thrust into his soul, for it forced him to see how far the chasm stretched between human decency and Ashari tradition. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The air around Elias seemed to grow still, as though time itself hesitated. Tanel's voice broke through the silence, soft yet laden with reverence. You saved us, Commander. I was there, hiding beneath the ruins, watching as your squadron approached." Elias stiffened, the memory faint, as distant as a shadow. He had not remembered it until now. Too many battles, too many faces lost to the madness of war. He had been ordered to obliterate the Ashari stronghold, to exterminate every last soldier and civilian in the area. But in the thick of it, he had seen the children, seen them hiding, terrified, in the crumbling structures. He had defied orders. He had called for a ceasefire, spared the civilians, and struck only at the enemy combatants. Tanel's voice wavered, and for the first time, a flicker of human emotion crossed her alien features. "Your mercy, your humanity, it shattered everything I believed about you, about us. You were supposed to be savages, mercenaries, but you acted with honor." Elias looked at her, his face unreadable. The act had been instinctual, a soldier's decision in the heat of the moment, and yet it had saved her, saved many. His soul, heavy with the weight of past decisions, ached. Elias stood motionless, the enormity of the choice pressing down on him like the weight of a collapsing sky. His mind raced through every possible outcome. Reject her, and he condemns her to death or slavery, an innocent woman lost to the politics of her shattered empire. Accept, and he risks his career, his integrity, and his very soul, caught between the rigid laws of humanity and the alien customs of an empire now in ruins. He could see it all unfold in the cold light of logic, the protector or the predator. A man who sacrifices his own honor for a woman of an enemy species, or a peacekeeper turned warlord, using an ancient ritual to advance his own interests. The galaxy was watching, every faction ready to twist his decision to fit their own agenda. His fingers tightened around the hilt of his weapon, a subconscious act of defiance. He had fought countless battles, made countless decisions, but none felt as final as this one. No soldier's code had prepared him for this. Then, without a word, Aceris, the half-human child, quietly reached for his hand. Her small fingers, trembling yet steady, grasped his. The simple gesture spoke volumes: trust, desperation, and hope. In that moment, Elias knew. The weight of the choice was clear, and the burden was his alone to bear. News of Elias's decision spread faster than wildfire. Through satellite feeds, encrypted broadcasts, and whispered rumors that darted through back channels like ghosts in the void. The fallen princess, once the heir to the Ashari throne, had chosen a human to offer her life and her child's in a desperate pact. Human diplomats scrambled, their voices rising in panicked debates. The political fallout could shatter fragile alliances, ignite rebellion, or worse, trigger open warfare between human factions and the Ashari dominion's fractured remnants. Peace was delicate, but now it teetered on the edge of a blade. Ashari exiles, scattered across the galaxy, reacted with disbelief and outrage. To them, Tanael's act was a betrayal of their sacred code, an abandonment of her bloodline's honor. The very thought that she would bind herself to a human, an enemy, was an insult that burned through their collective pride. Meanwhile, in the dark corners of the digital expanse, a rogue AI surveillance node silently recorded the exchange, its circuits pulsing with unknown intent. Was it watching to judge, to learn, or to manipulate? Its motives remained as inscrutable as the cosmos themselves. Elias knelt, not in submission, but in solidarity. The dust of the ruined palace clung to his knees, and the weight of the moment pressed down on him like gravity itself. His hand rested on the hilt of his sidearm, but it was no weapon now. It was a symbol, a gesture of protection, a promise to the fallen princess who had entrusted him with her life. He spoke few words, his voice steady, but not without strain. "I offer you protection, Princess Tanael," Elias said, his voice a quiet rumble in the still air. "On human terms, I will guard your life, your daughters, and see that peace holds, whatever that may cost." Tanael, ever proud, accepted his offer with a slow nod. She modified her vow, using human diplomatic phrasing, an alien promise reshaped to fit the human world. The blending of their cultures had begun. Ahceris, still silent through it all, sat at their feet, her small fingers tracing patterns in the ashen earth. She drew a symbol, half circle, half star, her own creation, a mark of duality, of two worlds beginning to merge. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension as Elias tried to reframe the offer. What had been a deeply ingrained tradition of the Ashari Empire, the sacred concubine hostage pact, was suddenly twisted into something unrecognizable. "I can't accept it like this," Elias said, voice firm but laced with hesitation. "This isn't about ownership or exploitation. You're not a slave, Tanael. This is political asylum. I'll grant you protection, but we have to avoid the optics of something darker, something human eyes would never accept." Tanael recoiled, her eyes flashing with offended pride. "You misunderstand, Commander. The concubine hostage vow is not an act of shame. It's survival, honor in its purest form. I offer myself not as a bargaining chip, but as a symbol of loyalty, of trust between us." Her voice trembled, but only slightly. Ilias held her gaze, trying to meet her on some common ground. "And that's where we differ. In the human world, that's a practice is steeped in exploitation. It's too easily twisted. I can't, no, I won't, let it be seen as anything less than an asylum agreement, a safe haven, not an exchange of ownership." The cultural dissonance between them was palpable, like two galaxies on a collision course. What was sacred to her was a complicated political symbol to him. Survival and shame collided in her eyes, while legalism and symbolism jostled in his mind. He had made his choice, but at what cost? Could there truly be peace when their worlds were so fundamentally different? The wind howled across the shattered ruins of the Ashari palace as Elias and Tanael stood firm. Behind them, a convoy of mercenaries approached, dark silhouettes in the dusty haze. At their head was General Kiran, once a celebrated commander of the Ashari forces, now a warlord who commanded the loyalty of ruthless mercenaries. His heavy boots thudded on the cracked stone as he neared, his scarred face twisted in a snarl. "Commander Rourke," he called out, his voice low and venomous. "You've made a mistake. The princess is spoils of war. You have no right to her. Hand her over, or the law of post-war tribes will fall upon your head." Ilias met his gaze without flinching. The general's words, though wrapped in law, were more a pretext for dominance than a plea for justice. Kiran stepped closer, his men flanking him with weapons drawn. "You're meddling in things beyond your understanding, Rourke. The Ashari have their ways, tribal codes. I will offer you a generous bribe, but only if you step aside." The offer hung in the air like a poisoned fruit. Elias shook his head, resolve hardening in his chest. "I'll do no such thing." Kiran's face darkened. "Then prepare yourself. You've chosen the wrong side, Commander." He drew his blade, signaling his mercenaries to follow suit. A fight was inevitable. Elias's decision had drawn the line in the sand. There would be no turning back now. The assassination attempt came in the dead of night, A quiet whisper of poison slipped into Tennille's drink. She had barely taken a sip when the sickness hit, blinding, crippling. Her body trembled with the venom's fury, and for a moment she thought death had found her at last. But Tennille was no stranger to danger. She forced herself to stand, pushing the poison aside with her indomitable will. With shaky hands, she reached for the ceremonial dagger hidden at her waist, the blade forged with ancestral blood, a tool of survival, not just tradition. Ilias burst into the room, his military instincts kicking in as he saw the pale, sweating princess clutching her throat. He had no time for hesitation. He ordered his medics to administer an antidote, but the poison had already done its damage. The dark shadows of the attack were clear. Tennille's eyes flashed with recognition. "It's my kin," she murmured. "They would rather see me dead than united with a human." Elias's brow furrowed. "Your own family?" Tennille nodded grimly. "The Ashari nobility resolve disputes through cleansing blood rites. They've always preferred death to compromise." Aceris, hidden in the corner of the room, clutched her small hands together, witnessing the violence in silence. Her wide eyes, full of innocence just moments ago, now reflected something darker. The weight of betrayal and bloodshed had changed her. In that moment, she understood more than a child should. Ilias and Tennille sat beneath the pale light of the shattered stars, their words the only thing breaking the silence of the ruins. The tension between them was palpable, not just in their posture, but in their voices. Tennille spoke first, her tone resolute. "You do not understand, Elias. The traditions of my people are everything. Without them, we are nothing. The concubine hostage vow is sacred. It has kept us alive through centuries of war. You cannot simply dismiss it as some outdated custom." Elias's gaze was steady, but his words cut deep. "Tradition? You speak of tradition, but at what cost? What does it mean to be alive if you sacrificed your freedom, your very self, for a promise made by others?" Her face tightened, the pride of her bloodline pushing back against his words. "Survival, Elias. Survival demands sacrifices. The world we live in is not a place for ideals. It is a place where duty matters more than sentiment, where power is everything." "But at what point does duty turn into oppression?" Elias countered, his voice rising. "What kind of survival is it if you lose what makes you human?" The silence stretched between them, the weight of their differing beliefs heavy in the air. Neither of them won the argument, but each had glimpsed something of the other's soul, a deeper understanding forming, one forged in conflict and reflection. Aceris sat quietly between Elias and her mother, her small hands brushing the glowing bioluminescent fungi that Tennille had taught her to meditate with. The soft light bathed her in a peaceful, otherworldly glow, yet there was a storm within her, an unspoken conflict between the two worlds she was born into. Elias watched the child, noting how she had inherited her mother's grace, but carried the confusion of her father's world in her eyes. She was a living contradiction, caught between the traditions of the Ashari and the ideals of humanity. Later, as they sat in silence, Aceris turned to Elias, her voice small and tentative. "What is freedom?" she asked, the weight of the word unfamiliar to her. Elias hesitated, searching for an answer that a child of both cultures might understand. "Freedom is," he began, then faltered, unsure how to explain the concept that had so shaped his own life. It was a word wrapped in layers of history, of battles fought and ideals burned. Aceris's eyes were filled with quiet yearning as she began drawing again, her fingers tracing a hybrid symbol in the ash, half circle, half star. A fusion of human and Ashari, as if she was trying to reconcile both sides of herself, both worlds, with every stroke. The whispers began as a ripple, but soon they became a storm. The Unity Front, on a radical faction of human supremacists, branded Elias a traitor. To them, his actions had crossed a line that could never be forgiven. His decision to protect an Ashari princess and her hybrid child, an affront to their twisted vision of humanity's dominance, was an act of betrayal, one they would not let go unpunished. Posters appeared across stations and colonies, spreading propaganda that painted Elias as a pawn in a plot to weaken human sovereignty. They accused him of selling out humanity for the sake of an alien seductress, words laced with venom, aimed at sowing division among his people. As the pressure mounted, the threat became more tangible. The Unity Front put a bounty on Tanael and Aseris, promising rich rewards to anyone who could deliver them, dead or alive. The factions of Vareth 7 were divided, and every shadow seemed to hide a potential assassin. Elias felt the weight of his decisions grow heavier with each passing hour, knowing that the target on Tanael's back was now a target on his own. Every choice, every moment, pushed him closer to the dangerous edge of a war he had fought so hard to avoid. The road to Mayatir was a razor's edge, and Elias knew it. His decision to escort Tanael to the peace summit, despite the political storm brewing around them, was as much an act of defiance as it was diplomacy. The summit on the moon of Mayatir, a neutral ground, was their last hope for peace, but Elias was under no illusion. He suspected both human and Ishari factions had plans to eliminate Tanael before she could speak. The risk of ambush was all but certain. As they prepared for their departure, Tanael carried herself with an unnerving calm. She had already reconciled herself to the idea of death. The dangers she faced were nothing new to her. After all, her life had been one of constant survival, always a step away from the blood-soaked rituals of her people. Elias couldn't help but admire the stoic resolve in her eyes, though it only deepened the gnawing guilt in his gut. His decision to protect her could cost them both everything. Then Aseris spoke, her soft voice breaking through the tension. "Will I see stars with you, Elias?" she asked, her large eyes wide with an innocence that sent a pang of sorrow through him. The question was simple, but in it lay the unspoken fear of a child too young to understand the true cost of survival. Elias knelt beside her, fighting to steady his voice. "Yes, Aseris, we'll see the stars together, I promise." The sky caravan hummed through the stars like a fragile thread of hope, suspended in the black void between warring worlds. Inside, Elias watched the stars glide past the shuttle's translucent windows, feeling the weight of the journey pressing down on him. The summit on Mayatir loomed ahead, but as much as he tried to focus on the peace they hoped to broker, he couldn't shake the gnawing sense that something was wrong. It happened just after they hit the edge of the asteroid belt, the engines vibrating oddly, throwing everyone into sudden tension. A sharp, metallic scent filled the air, followed by the harsh beep of the shuttle's emergency systems. Tanael stood, her hand instinctively reaching for Aseris, while Elias bolted to the control deck. There, a crew member, a nervous, sweating man, had just discovered the source of the disturbance. A bomb, cleverly hidden in a compartment meant for emergency supplies. The device was a horrifying fusion of human technology and Ashari biochemical codes. Alien, yet disturbingly familiar. It had been designed to trigger a silent, slow release of toxins into the cabin's air supply, killing everyone inside. Whoever had planted it was sending a message, and the fact that it combined the worst of both sides only deepened the dread. On the bridge, the ship's AI, a rogue unit called Dawnfire, offered cryptic commentary as Elias examined the bomb, its digital voice laced with passive indifference. "Curious, a diplomatic shuttle targeted, yet we have no enemies, only ghosts." The AI's aloofness was unsettling. Elias, however, was more focused on the implications. Both the human and Ishari factions had a vested interest in this mission's failure. No one wanted peace, not really, but Aseris, the child, the hybrid symbol of a potential future, might just be the spark that ignited a new path forward. Elias clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. He would protect her at all costs. The convoy wound through the jagged, windswept canyon known as Kaleth's Spine, the towering rock formations casting long, foreboding shadows. The air was thick with the hum of electromagnetic interference, a natural feature of the region that scrambled communications and rendered most of the shuttle's defense systems useless. It was the perfect place for an ambush, and Elias could feel the tension mounting in his bones. The convoy moved cautiously, engines purring low as they navigated the narrow path between the cliffs. Elias, ever watchful, scanned the high ground, his military instincts on edge. Something wasn't right. He had hoped the summit might open a path to peace, But the unsettling silence told a different story. Suddenly, the peace shattered with the crack of sniper fire. Bullets zipped past, tearing into the shuttle's hull. Elias dove instinctively for cover, his heart racing as the first wave of shots slammed into the convoy. From the cliffs hidden in the shadows, the snipers of the Human Unity Front unleashed their fury. Twisted zealots who saw Elias's protection of Tanael as betrayal. Before they could react, another wave of attackers surged from below, their forces a brutal mixture of Ashari purists who sought to destroy any hope of human Ashari peace. The canyon's narrow walls echoed with the chaos as explosions rocked the ground beneath them, sending debris into the air. Elias's mind raced, his military training kicking in. It wasn't just an ambush, it was a coordinated assault, a well-organized effort from both human extremists and radical Ishari factions, bent on ensuring the summit failed. His jaw tightened. This summit was never meant to succeed. The peace they sought was already buried beneath the weight of their enemies' hatred. As the gunfire continued, Elias's resolve hardened. The fight for survival had just begun, and peace seemed further away than ever. The chaos of the ambush raged around Elias, gunfire punctuating the air with each passing second. The convoy's defenses were in disarray, and the attackers pressed closer, forcing their way toward the shuttle. Amid the madness, a low, urgent voice broke through the noise. "Commander, we've got an escape pod ready. We need to get out, now!" A soldier, his face pale with fear, grabbed Elias's arm. "We've got data, intel vital to the summit. We can't waste any more time. We leave, we survive. Please." For a heartbeat, Elias stood frozen, his eyes scanning the surrounding chaos. The escape pod hummed in the distance, a symbol of safety. Escape. But his hand tightened around his rifle as the memories rushed back. Memories of the last time he ran. It had been years ago during the war, when Elias had abandoned his unit to save a group of civilians. He had left behind his comrades, the men he had sworn to protect. The guilt had been a weight on his soul ever since. Aceris's trembling hand brushed against his, snapping him out of his frozen reverie. He looked down at her wide eyes, filled with fear yet unspoken understanding. The weight of duty pressed on him like never before. He could run, protect himself, and abandon it all. But not this time. Not again. "No," Elias muttered, his voice hoarse but determined. "Not this time." He turned, gripping Aceris's hand tightly, knowing what he had to do. Survival was no longer an option. This was about something bigger, and he wasn't leaving anyone behind. Amidst the gunfire and shouts of chaos, Princess Tanael's hands moved with an unexpected calm, her eyes fixed on the ring around her finger, the symbol of her royal bloodline, her authority. The Ashari diplomatic ring was no mere ornament. It was a sacred artifact, binding the wearer to the highest codes of ceasefire and negotiation. Its power was immense, its significance irreplaceable. With a deep breath, Tanael removed the ring, the weight of the decision sinking into her chest. She knew what it meant, relinquishing not just a symbol of her authority, but also her last claim to the title of princess. It was an irreversible act, a sacrifice that would not be undone. Elias glanced at her, his expression hard, his rifle never wavering as he held the line. In this moment, the roles reversed. It wasn't just his duty to protect her. Now she was protecting all of them with a decision far heavier than any weapon. Tanael carefully placed the ring into the transmitter, her hands trembling but steady with resolve. The device hummed to life as she pressed the button, embedding the ring's essence into the communication signal. The air seemed to still as a cascading symbol appeared, glowing in the space between them. A command, a ceasefire order sent across all Ashari ranks. A visual pulse of power that cut through the battlefield like a blade. Tanael's sacrifice wasn't just for survival, it was a final plea for peace. The battlefield froze, the air thick with the tension of impending violence, as Tanael's cousin appeared from the shadows. His armor was pristine, a gleaming testament to his status as an elite warrior of the Ashari Dominion. His face, once familiar in childhood sparring matches, was now a mask of fury and disdain. "You have betrayed your bloodline, Tanael," he declared, voice cold with contempt. "You choose the human over your people. You dishonor everything our ancestors fought for." His eyes narrowed, and with a swift motion, he unsheathed the ritual blade, the ancestral weapon of their house. "I offer you mercy, cousin," he said, stepping closer, the challenge clear in his gaze. "A swift death would preserve the purity of our bloodline. Do not make me do this." Tennille's grip tightened around the hilt of her own blade, the symbol of her birthright and heritage. She had known this moment would come, the day her own kin would see her as a traitor, but she had never imagined it would be him. The two clashed, blades singing in the air, a dance of destruction honed by years of shared history. Her cousin was a master, but she was no longer the naive child he had trained. In a brutal, decisive strike, she drove her blade through his chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. As he crumpled to the ground, Tennille whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "Then let our legacy be broken." Her bloodline, her identity, everything she once knew, was shattered in that moment. Elias's body was a battlefield in itself, blood soaking through his uniform, the searing pain in his side nearly overwhelming his senses. He had failed to anticipate this, the ambush, the betrayal, the sudden onslaught from every direction. Yet he had one final duty: protect Aceres. As he tried to rise, a blast sent him crashing to the ground, his vision spinning. Aceres, her small body still trembling with fear, threw herself over him, her eyes locked with his, wide and filled with an understanding far beyond her years. The young hybrid girl's form, fragile yet determined, blocked the incoming fire with her body. She whimpered, tears falling from her eyes as her small hands gripped his shoulders, trying to keep him from slipping further into unconsciousness. Through the pain, Elias's HUD flickered, showing fractured images of his past, the faces of soldiers he had abandoned, the cities he had failed to save, and the lives he had destroyed in the name of duty. His mind raced, the weight of every choice crashing down on him. But in this moment, something shifted within him. A final redemption was within reach. A soft voice broke through the haze. Aceres' first words, clear and resolute, "We stay together." Tennille reached them, her eyes steely with resolve as she cradled them both in her arms. The flames of war raged around them, but in that small, fragile moment of peace, she chose. She chose them, her new family. Amid the ruins of the ambush, the summit continued, stubbornly, as the surviving diplomats filed into the makeshift conference hall. The explosions from the attack still echoed in the distance, but they were quieted by the looming specter of something far worse: an all-out war. Fear had become their common language. Even now, with death and blood staining the very ground beneath them, the diplomats gathered, gripping their fragile alliances as though it could stave off the darkness. Elias stood at the heart of it all, shackled, his eyes locked on the horizon, though his heart was tethered to the memories of the battlefield and the choices he had made. Human hands clamped down on his wrists as the arresting officers whispered in hurried tones, accusing him of harboring a war criminal. The weight of those words bore down on him, not just the charge, but what it symbolized. He had broken the sacred laws of neutrality. He had protected a former enemy. He had chosen to save the future over preserving a broken past. Yet as they led him away, shackled and condemned, he glanced back. Tennille was there, watching him with quiet strength, her lips curled into a subtle smile, one of understanding. They had both made choices, ones that would never be understood by those who clung to power. And the galaxy watched. Once more, it would be torn apart by judgment and politics. Tennille stood before the Interstellar Council, her regal presence unwavering despite the weight of her circumstances. The cold, sterile walls of the chamber seemed to shrink around her, but she held her ground, every inch of her form exuding the quiet strength of a woman who had been tested by fire. Her voice, though soft, echoed with authority, cutting through the tension like a blade. "I stand here not as a fallen princess," she began, her gaze sweeping over the council members, some sympathetic, others cold, "but as a woman who has chosen to rewrite a tradition that has long been misunderstood." The room murmured. Her words were like a spark in dry tinder. "I gave myself not as a possession, but as a promise." Her eyes never wavered from the council's stern faces. "A promise of peace, a promise to be more than what my people demanded of me, more than what any tradition required." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle, then continued, Elias Rourke is not my captor. He is the first man in my life who offered protection without control, who saw me as an equal, not as a symbol or a pawn. The silence that followed was palpable, suffocating as the council members processed her words. For a moment, even the air seemed to hold its breath. The foundations of old worlds were being shaken, and no one, not even the council, could predict what would come next. Elias Rourke stood before the official logs, his discharge papers glistening with the cold indifference of bureaucracy. The words on the screen were clinical, stripping away the humanity of his actions. Emotionally compromised. A polite euphemism for a man who had defied every protocol to protect the innocent. Yet the galaxy had already formed its own judgment. Heroes didn't need official titles. They were shaped by their deeds, not their uniforms. Elias had become a symbol of something more profound. A man who had chosen peace over politics, who had faced the impossible, and walked away with his integrity intact. He walked away from the uniform without bitterness, his chest empty of both pride and shame. The military had been his identity for so long, but now it was a shadow that no longer fit. The weight of his past had been carried long enough. Freedom for once was a choice, not a consequence. As Elias left the facility, the doors closed behind him with a finality that echoed through his mind. The path ahead was unknown, but for the first time in years it felt like his own. No titles, no duties, just the quiet promise of a life he would now choose for himself. Tanael stood before the council, the weight of 1,000 years of tradition pressing down on her. Yet she wore no crown, no throne. Her title now was not of royalty, but of something new, something revolutionary, ambassador of Ashari human reconciliation. There were no sigils on her attire, no symbols of the empire she had once been destined to rule. Instead, the only mark of her authority was a simple drawing, a child's handcrafted emblem of entwined worlds, drawn by a Ceres. It was the future Tanael had chosen, a future that bridged cultures, not bound by ancient crowns or bloodlines. The elders of Ashari nobility rejected her, calling her a disgrace, an abomination. But the younger generations, those who had never known the empire's full glory, began to look to her for guidance. Slowly the tides were shifting. Tanael had found a title with no chains, a new beginning, not for herself, but for her people. Ceres stood at the heart of a cautious ceremony, the world watching, waiting for her to step into a legacy that was both hers and not hers. She was no longer hidden, no longer the secret of her mother's sacrifice. Her existence, a bridge between two worlds, sparked both reverence and fear. The media, with their sharp tongues, dubbed her the Dagger Child, a symbol of survival in the dangerous mix of human and Ashari blood. But to Elias, she was not a symbol, not a weapon or a figurehead. She was simply a child, one learning to laugh again, to play in the spaces between cultures. As she reached for his hand, her smile unguarded, Elias knew that whatever the galaxy saw in her, she was still the daughter he had come to protect, and that was enough. In the quiet of the room, far from the gaze of the universe, Tanael honored Elias with a ceremony that transcended politics and bloodlines. It was not a romantic gesture, but a sacred rite born from both of their worlds. Her hands, steady despite the weight of history, painted his palms with ash and silver, the ancient Ishari mark of a shield-bearer. It was a gesture of protection, not possession, a binding that no one else could understand. Elias, in turn, offered his own symbol. From the worn fabric of his past, he presented a hand-woven patch, the last piece of a life he'd left behind. It bore no flag, no banner of nations, just a lone star, a symbol of his allegiance to a future not defined by war. When the rites ended, no words were necessary. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of shared sacrifice, of respect across worlds. There, in that unspoken understanding, they found a bridge that no war or title could destroy. Elias could have left, could have taken the honors and promotions that followed his actions, but he chose another path. He stayed on Vareth 7, the planet scarred by war, and began to build something new from its ashes. With his hands in the dust of old battlefields, he broke ground on a settlement where Ishari and humans could learn to coexist. The foundation was not just made of stone and steel, but of something more fragile. Trust, hard-earned and tentative. He named it Kariza, an ancient Ishari word that spoke of the space between storms, the calm before or after chaos. It was a fitting name, for it reflected the uneasy peace he hoped to nurture there, even if the storm would always be a breath away. The first buildings rose from the ruins of the old palace where Tanael had first made her offer, now a monument not to surrender, but to resilience. Walls that had once held secrets of war now bore the weight of something else: hope. In this city, Elias would not find his redemption, but he would build a future for those who needed one. A place where old wounds might finally heal, if only in the quiet between storms. The world doesn't shift overnight. Hatred lingers, fear still lingers in the shadows. But in the markets, a hybrid child walks, her steps uncertain, but steady. A fallen soldier, his hands now stained with dirt rather than blood, teaches warlords and orphans alike how to plant new life in a fractured world. And Tanael, once a woman who knelt in surrender, now walks upright, her voice steady, her heart unbowed. In the quiet spaces between her steps, the world begins again, one fragile hope at a time. Change is slow, but it has a face now. Years have passed, and Karesha stands as a testament to what can be built from ashes. No longer a fragile settlement, it has grown into a thriving metropolis, where Ishari crystal spires and earth-steel towers rise above streets once barren with war. Markets hum with the languages of both species. Children from every race run through shared spaces, their laughter echoing off walls that once stood in ruin. The scars of war are still visible, etched into the architecture, a reminder of what was lost and what was earned in its place. Aceris, now in her early 20s, moves through Carisa's diplomatic quarter with quiet authority. Her steps carry the weight of both Ishari grace and human resilience. Yet in her eyes flickers the knowledge of what she will never be. Too human for the Ishari, too alien for Earth. But she doesn't need to belong to either. She is a new possibility, one neither side could have imagined. She pauses before a mural of Elias and Tanael, hands clasped in unity across the stars, a symbol of everything they built and everything she will continue to. The sound of chimes fills the air, not in alarm but in greeting. A diplomatic vessel enters orbit, its markings unfamiliar, alien glyphs pulsing with strange energy. This new race has never been part of the human-Ishari conflict. Their arrival signals something beyond the old war, a future unwritten, still unfolding. Not all are ready for it. Tensions rise as some view these newcomers as a challenge to the fragile peace, a reminder that the galaxy is larger than their old conflicts. But others see opportunity. The future, once uncertain, now calls them forward. Aceris steps onto the landing pad, flanked by dignitaries, historians, and envoys. She wears both her mother's Ishari sigil, symbol of sacrifice, and her father's Earth military medal, polished by years but still holding the weight of the past. Each step is measured, symbolic. She represents the bridging of two worlds and the hope that her generation will walk a path that others never could. As she prepares to speak first for both species, she wonders if the newcomers understand the weight of the peace they've come to inherit, or the sacrifices it took to reach this moment. The ship doors hiss open, revealing figures that carry the weight of their unknown history. Aceris breathes, her gaze steady, her heart a little lighter than before. Behind her, decades of war, sacrifice, and uneasy peace. Before her, the future, a future her father always believed was worth walking into, even when the way was uncertain. Peace, she reflects, was never the end. It was just the opening note to something larger than any of us. And with that thought, she steps forward, ready to face whatever this new chapter may bring.